and it really made a mark. And it was when I was in grade school. You struggle with bullying and you struggle with problems, and you're starting to kind of grow up and rejection and trying to deal with all these things. And I just remember losing that sense of God's love. Like, I remember trying to figure out how I could be the kind of person that everybody would just like, because it seemed like I was not that kind of person. And as I got into high school, that pursuit got more and more exhausting, because I thought it was going to be popularity. I thought it would be like, if I made really good grades, if I dated the right guy, if I was popular, whatever. So I kept pursuing and striving for all of these like top dog things. And I was exhausted because it was like trying to juggle 20,000 balls at the same time. And I started to ask myself, like, is this what I really want? Because this is really becoming crazy and too difficult to maintain. And around that time, I went on a retreat for teenagers. Now, I went to public school. I didn't go to Catholic school, so I didn't even really know what a retreat was. But I had a crush on a guy, and I found out he was going to be at the retreat. So I was like, "Oh, I'll go, whatever it is, I'll go." And so I'm there at the retreat, and like, when you like somebody, your antenna is like right on that person. You're not really paying attention to what's going on. You're really watching, your the one you like. So I kind of wasn't paying attention, and all I care about is like my hair and my sweater. And these young people came out and they started doing these kind of like skits, and despite myself, it caught my attention, and I really started like losing myself in laughing and just enjoying them being crazy. And I was so wrapped up in my looks and in my appearance and who was there, and smelling nice, everything. And these girls that were on this team, they were giving a year of their life. So they took a year away from college. They were young adults, and they would take a year and travel to all different high schools and parishes and do these retreats that might last a day. It might last 3 hours. This one just lasted 3 hours. And they were doing all these fun things, but their main objective, as I found out over the course of the night, was that we would come into contact with God's love. And at the end of the evening, number one, I realized like I kind of like to talk about God. Like, we got into small groups, and I was like, "Ooh, that's kind of nice. I really like that, talking about God." And and then at the end of the night, they invited us to just kind of sit next to one of the team members, and she would pray with us. And up to that point, prayer was like, say your prayers. Like, my parents taught me how to say my prayers or go to mass. And so it was sort of like not connecting to me. But as she prayed with me, she had her hand on my shoulder and she asked me, she said, "Do you need anything from Jesus? Do you want to ask him for anything?" And I never had anybody ask me that question. And for whatever reason, the connection to God like hit me again. And it's almost like that little seed that God planted when I was 8, sort of like he shook it up, he poked at it. And I was sitting there like connecting to God in a personal way again, or almost like for the first time again. And it really moved me. And I realized that I had a great desire to grow in that. And so I I remember just admiring them and thinking that was so beautiful to give your life for other people. But I didn't think that that was going to be something I would do. I just admired them. But part of the upshot of that whole thing was I did ended up dating the guy that I liked. And he was a believer, but he wasn't Catholic. He was a Baptist. And he prayed too. And the way he put it, he talked to Jesus. And I was like, does he talk to you back? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, well, nobody told me he talks to people like personally. So I remember I went home from that date. This is like our second date. And I went home, I woke my parents up. I'm like, I'm home. And then I went into the living room by myself. The lights were off. I knelt down on the ground, on the floor, and I was like, Jesus, um, hi, I hear you talk to people. Why don't you talk to me? You know? And I started to just talk to God, like here and there. And as I started to build my prayer life, that desire that I had, all of those needs I had to be perfect and to be liked by people and to be um, successful, they started to like lose their intensity, and I started to have more, because even as I was talking to my boyfriend, I was like, I want what he has. Like, as much as I liked him, I think I wanted what he was talking about even more. And I remember thinking, like, wow, that's kind of funny, but it's real. Like, I really want a relationship with Jesus. And so, as my desire started to shift, I started to find out about other, you know, ways of loving God. And in that time, I was making different decisions than my friends. We could just go out, go crazy. Like, the fact that I survived my high school years is a miracle of Jesus Christ. So here I am today, alive and well, thanks be to God. But I didn't do that much to like help that along, because I did some crazy things. But as I started making those different choices, I started pulling away from those crazy things. And sometimes my friends thought, wow, Tracy thinks she's too good for us, and they would like put me down. And I was like, well, I didn't want to go out with you anyway. And so one of those nights I was watching TV, and there was a movie that had a religious actress, but it was a religious nun that was a character. And somehow God, he knows who we are. He knows what draws us. He knows what attracts our hearts. He put this image, because I'm an artist, in front of me, and the image represented everything that I was starting to really like desire, like giving your beauty to the Lord, like giving your whole future to God, living your whole life in prayer. And it was like all of those pieces kind of came together. And I just remember the movie was really weird. It was called Agnes of God, and it was so bizarre. But like, I didn't even get it. All I got was this cool nun was in this movie. She was actually pretty messed up. But anyway, the movie was not the story that caught me. It was the image. And after that, I had this like question, like, what's a nun? And I actually asked a priest that. I was like, tell me what's a nun. And he's looking at me all decked out in my earrings and my perm, and he's like, why do you want to know? And I was like, information. But I found out that there was a girl who was joining a religious order, and I talked to her, and it's almost like it was a total letdown, because everything she said, I realized, and how she was. She's very quiet. She's very humble. She's very delicate. And I was sort of like, ah! And I was like, oh my gosh, this is probably not for me, because I'm not that kind of person. And so this other person overhears me talking to this girl, calls me later, and invites me to go visit a religious order. And I thought to myself, there's no way I'm going with you. You're a complete stranger. You might kidnap me. I don't want to go. And she ended up convincing me to meet her and her family at the mall, because I knew where the mall was, because that's all I wanted to do when I grew up. Like, my friends wanted to like be doctors. I wanted a job at the mall so that I would get a discount at the Gap. That was my goal in high school. And so I knew where the mall was. So we meet there and we drive to New Orleans. Now that was like 2.5 hours from my home. And we get to this bookstore, and I'm like, I didn't know we had to go shopping. We get out the car, and these nuns come to the door, and I'm like, there are nuns in a store? And I eventually started to understand what our mission was, but they had to explain that to me. But the sisters took me from where I was, and they gradually just explained what their mission was, how they prayed, and they just were open to letting me learn. And even though I did not understand a lot of what they said because my catechesis level was like very simple, I could see them. Like I could see these beautiful ladies who were all different ages, all different cultures, all different backgrounds, but they came together to give their whole life to the Lord through the mission that we have, which is evangelization. And as I understood that, that meant, you know, you're telling the story about what you experience with God. It's like my heart just got like caught on fire. And I kept visiting them and they encouraged me to go to college. So I went to college. I was a fine arts major. But all the while, like meeting them, you know, making, having experiences of the mission of the prayer life. And after that year, I entered the community. I spent 5 years in formation, 2 years as a novice. So, and novitiate is challenging. It kind of like opens your heart up and takes out the bad stuff. And sometimes you're like, I don't want to give that up, you know, but it's part of our conversion, which the Lord is always molding us into the image of Jesus. And that requires our freedom to say, yes, I surrender. I surrender everything I am to you, Lord. And I'm willing to pour it out, not so that I just be empty, but so that I be filled with Jesus, so that I can give him, and also that I can pour into others what God has poured into me so generously and given so much to me and to my family and to everybody that I've been able to come in contact with through our life. So here I am. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I'm sure that though you have to move along, so I don't want to take up too much time. You can jump in if you want, just like say it. Some people ask me like, how did my parents react? And they did not understand what was going on because like all they knew of me was, you know, this was like late 80s. So like I had, you know, my hair and my makeup. And then like all of a sudden I tell them one day, I'm going on a retreat. And they were like, wow, that's great. You know, what's a retreat? So they went to church, but their relationship at the time with God was sort of just you go to mass. So at first they didn't understand, but they could start to see like the transformation that started to happen with me. And my mom told me once, she goes, you know, I don't, I didn't understand what you were living, what you were experiencing because I never experienced it. But she said, I always wanted to see my children happy, and whatever they would choose to do, if that's where it brought them happiness and joy, true joy, um, I wanted that for them. And she told me she could see me when I would come home from visiting the nuns. She'd be like, "You were happy. You were so content." So she knew that, you know, it's pretty clear that I was probably called to this.
Awesome. This is a chance. Can you guys hear me? I was having difficulty
Mm-hmm.
unmuting myself when Sister Tracy paused the first time. But this is a chance during our novitiate nights to get to know some of our other members of the Pauline family. Every single month, we are having a sister or a priest. Every month, we'll have Holy Family Institute members, but we're having a sister or a priest every month, so we get to know them. Does anyone have a question about Sister Tracy's mission, her life as a daughter of St. Paul? Is a great chance to ask a question. Also, she gets to know some of you. Would anyone like to raise your hand? I'm not sure how my Zoom thing is working. So in the actual video, if you have a question, just raise your hand and you can ask a question. Anyone have all right. courageously, Monica. Monica Mejia. Go ahead and ask.
This is great. What an amazing story. Thank you for sharing it. All my life I was curious about nuns, but I don't know much about it. So it's very nice to see the way you are, because like you said, you thought quiet, humble. So it's like I'm seeing a young girl. So it's very
but I'm not. But anyway.
but it's really nice, your story. Thank you
Yeah.
for sharing it. And so you said that one of your mission is evangelization, right? So spread the message.
Yes.
Can you tell or share a story of one of you, if you have experience with somebody that you talking and it didn't go the way you expected, how you manage that conversation, how you know that your message went or didn't, how it's accepted?
Yeah, that's kind of like the characteristic of most days of our work, that you're basically offering, you know, what you have. You know, like Peter said, what I have I give to you. And sometimes people are open to that and sometimes people are not. When you first asked the question, that the experience that I had that came to my mind was, one of my first assignments was downtown Chicago, and we had, people would come in. There's tons of people that live on this street and people that are very eccentric. And we had a gentleman who would kind of come in, and uh, he had this. He would dress like Jesus Christ carrying the cross. So he would wear this purple like satin robe, like it was like right off of the stampita. So right off of the little holy card, the little one that had Jesus carrying the cross. So he would wear this robe, he would carry this life-size cross, and he had long black hair, and he would just carry the cross through Chicago. And he would walk into the book center, and some days he was wearing that, other days he was wearing another like religious thing. Sometimes he'd walk in with a big like wall crucifix, like huge thing, and he'd walk in, you know, and he'd put it aside, go into chapel, come out, take the cross, and keep walking. So one day I was like, I've got to. He never talked to us, and so one day I was like just professed, so I was like maybe 25 years old, and I'm just standing there in the store, and as he starts to walk out, I was like, hi, you know, and um I said, what's your name? And he said, Gustavo. I said, hey, Gustavo. I said, you're gonna have to kind of tell me about yourself one day. He goes, I will. And he walked out. And so later, he came back in, and I was busy at the front counter, and I see this finger kind of pushing a card across the counter, and I look up, and there's Gustavo pushing this little. So it was a little estampita of Jesus in the little purple dress, robe, and he's like, "This is for you," and I was like, "Well, thank you." So then he starts to tell me his story, because I was like, "You got to tell me, you know, why do you do this?" He told me his conversion story. He was in Mexico. He was a drug dealer, and he was also, they were like dabbling in diabolical things. And somehow in the midst of it, he became the one that was targeted for whatever. It was a bad thing. It was like murder or something. So he was running away or hiding from his gang. And in order to hide, he went into a Catholic church, ran into a room, and there was a priest in the room. And he starts like blurting out, "You've got to protect me. You've got to, you know, they're after me," and blah, blah, blah. So he ends up staying with the priest for like an hour and telling a story. And the priest listens to him and I think prayed with him. And in that prayer, Gustavo had to change his alliance. So he had to remove his commitment to the devil and to serving him in the way he was acting, and transfer his allegiance to God. And he said, "Sister, we are Mexican, so when we do these big things, we then dedicate our life to the Lord. And some of us decide to dress like him. And I was like, how long have you been doing this? And he said 7 years. And I think he continued for many more years. And he said, because, and this is the why I tell the story. He said, I am a fool. I've been a fool. And I have to be a fool for the Lord because he was a fool for me. He gave everything for me so that I would know that my life has value, that I can't just throw it away. So he said, I do this so that because I might be the only Jesus people on the street ever see. And I was like, Gustavo, do you have a family? And he said, I do. And I have a problem with commitment. So I don't know if he was like struggling to stay faithful to his wife or what. But so he was a real, he wasn't a perfect person. His conversion wasn't perfect, but he was doing his own, he was following Jesus in his own way with his whole heart. And he was so real. And I said, people wonder, if you're mentally ill? He says, maybe a little. And he walked out. So anyway, we were friends. And here and there, he would come in and he would say, Sister Tracy, pray over me. And I would start praying. And he'd go, no, touch my head. So I put my head on his head and pray over him. And then he would leave. Goodbye. Okay, bye. So.
Praise God. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for that question, Monica, and praise God. I mean, Sister Tracy's worked in book centers. She gives, I've known her giving talks to youth, and she's done so many forms of evangelization through the years. And I've been able to witness that. And we could go probably many, many nights as she shared experiences. But I'm going to thank Sister Tracy for your time tonight. And God bless you as you continue to work. What is your particular role right now, Sister Tracy?
So right now, my full-time ministry is I'm the director of mission advancement. So I work kind of behind the scenes to help us grow in our resources, in our funding for our missionary efforts. So I work with donors. I work with writing for grants. Because we're a nonprofit organization, we have to fund, have a lot of different revenue sources. So I do that, but I also sing in the choir. So we do live concerts. So we'll be having 2 concerts in the Boston area, in Natick, and that information is going to be out pretty soon. So I'll share it with Father Mike so that you can see me and 8 other of my nun posse singing Christmas songs and having a great old time closer to Christmas.
Awesome. We look forward to that. Many of those here have been to the Christmas concert. So
good.
Thank
you,
Tracy.
All right. Y'all have a great rest of your meeting, and I'll be praying for you. And if you have any specific things you'd like us to pray for, the sister to pray for, just tell Father Mike or write it in the chat and he can share it with me so that we can keep you all in our prayers. All right?
God bless you, Sister Tracy.
Thank you. God bless you.
So as Sister Tracy mentioned, novitiate is a time of taking an inner look. It's going within and not only making a decision on whether I want to join the Holy Family Institute, but my inner life, my inner look at what my relationship is like with God. And if we have become complacent, as we said, as a lot of people do, like I'm just fine, then, well, I would actually say too bad for you, because if you're fine, that means you probably become complacent. I don't think anyone is perfect. And we have to look at what are those things that might keep me from the Lord. And novitiate is really a time to go deep inside the heart. It's not a passive participation. If anybody here thinks that as you get into novitiate that it's passive participation, then you really got to go a different direction, because even living a Christian life is not passive participation. It calls for dynamic participation. It calls us to be involved. I never want to stand before the Lord and say, Lord, I just settled. I just settled. You know what the Lord will say to each and every one of us? I never knew you. That's what he will say. He will not say at that time, welcome, my good and faithful servant, into the kingdom that I have prepared for you from the foundation of the world. I dream about this. My greatest dreams are when I hear Jesus stand before me and say, welcome, my good and faithful servant, into the kingdom of heaven that I have prepared from you from the beginning of time. My nightmare, my greatest nightmare, if you ask me, is Jesus standing before me and saying, I never knew you. I never knew you. It would crush my heart. It would crush my soul, of course. And that only comes through one thing, and the word is complacency. When I have become lukewarm, Jesus did not hate those who were cold in the Bible. He hated more than anything else those who had become lukewarm, because he said he knew that I cannot touch you. I cannot do anything for you. You have become complacent. That's why you look at all the people who had conversions. They were at the depths of the low, whether they were Mary Magdalene or St. Thomas in his unbelief, or even Peter. They were people who wanted to engage. And Jesus then said to them, come and follow me. And now I will make you fishers of men. I will make you fishers of men. To the ordinary person, he called them to extraordinary mission. I know I use that terminology a lot when I use it in the Bible, that he takes the ordinary. We have to look at the ordinary circumstances, and then with Christ, we have to look at the extraordinary. That's the novitiate. The novitiate is recognizing that we are ordinary persons called to extraordinary mission in the Lord. So that's what I want to invite you into. I think most of you might have received the Holy Family Institute statutes. I think we just put it in the mail to Monica and Javier today, so you won't get that till tomorrow. But we put it in. Can you confirm that you can? If you have it, go ahead and hold on to it. I'm gonna open it up for you a little bit, okay? So so that we can go into the statutes. The reason I overnighted it was that some of you would have it for tonight's meeting. And I'm going to speak about it just a little bit, and then I'm going to give some flesh to it by asking Jim and Louisa McMillan to speak. So I think a couple of you went quickly to get them. So now I see you coming back to your seats. Okay. I'm going to call you to jump past. I've talked to you a lot about the spiritual life. I have held up for you what I would say are the greatest pillars of the spiritual life. You have probably heard me talk about that dozens of times. And I have talked about how if I could put it into just a few words, I would say the Eucharist. I put four components: the Eucharist, especially adoration and the Holy Mass. Number two, I would say devotion to Mary, especially the Rosary and the Angelus. Number three, I would say regular reading of the Word of God, that we are communicators of the gospel. And number four, evangelization. This is all outlined in the spiritual life aspects of the Holy Family Institute that are meant to become part and parcel of our life, part and parcel of our lives. So I'm going to pass over that today because I've talked about it so much. I will come back to it, but I'm going to go to chapter 3. And this is about following Christ. And as one member of one couple that's perpetually professed in the Holy Family Institute, this chapter is going to talk about the vows, poverty, chastity, and obedience. And he said, that scares a lot of people. He says, but the truth is, it doesn't call us to anything that I'm not, the church doesn't already call me to as a married person, except that I make a public witness of that with my life, that I make a public witness. So we are called to holiness, and that poverty, chastity, and obedience in married life is a way to holiness of life. But I'm called to that even if I don't take the vows in a actual institute, into a spiritual institute. But it does make my offering ever more valuable. When I consecrate it publicly, it makes my offering ever more valuable. And so Bishop Barron used to make, has made in recent talks, he talked about the 4 main temptations that we often pursue rigorously in our lives, in the world, what we see happening in the world. And he named those 4 as money, pleasure, fame or notoriety, and power. Those are the 4 like standing pillars of temptation that affect the human person in more or less levels. That we are tempted to money, tempted to pleasure, tempted to some kind of, I want to be honored, I want to be I want notoriety, and I want power. Now those could come in our lives. Those inherently aren't bad, but we pursue them rigorously to great fault in our world today. And what the vows do are the antidote to that. The antidote to money is poverty, seeking a spiritual poverty. The antidote to pleasure is chastity. The antidote to power, particularly, is obedience. And all of that gets taken up, I think, and I think the opposite of fame and notoriety is humility. Humility is what comes with living the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. So the first one we're going to only cover tonight, just a little bit of it, is conjugal chastity. And that word conjugal is important because we're speaking about chastity in married life. Your chastity, although you're called to the same chastity as me, every person is called to chastity, but your chastity is not a celibate chastity like mine is. I'm called to celibate chastity as a priest. And it's something that I have to work on. I just didn't pluck it off of a tree. And I still struggle with it like any person might have to do. It's a lifelong struggle at times. And some struggle more than others. But you, as married persons, are all called to conjugal chastity, to live your chaste lives. I mean, I know that lay people know this. That's why every morning when I hear confessions, there's a line for the confessional. And I'll tell you, at least in the case of men, if not the women, most of what they're confessing is being unchaste, in aspects of their lives. And it's usually young adults. Every single morning, they're in not the same people, but different people are in that confessional line because they know intuitively that they are called to chastity. And these are married people that are in line for the confessional. These are single people in line for the confessional. They know it intuitively that when they live unchaste lives, they need to be forgiven. And then they are called to chastity. So that is part of our lives. It's a beautiful word, and we're all called to it. In the Catechism of the Catholic Church, it says, it defines chastity as the successful integration of sexuality within the person. The successful integration of sexuality within the person. And it's a call just as much to married persons as it is to priests and religious. There's a nice quote here on page 25, and I'm going to call you to look at that. It says, authentic married love. I'm reading the English. I sent it to you in English and Spanish, that you could choose whichever statute you would like to use. But it says, authentic married love is caught up into divine love and is directed and enriched by the redemptive power of Christ and the salvific action of the church, with the result that the spouses are effectively led to God and are helped and strengthened in their lofty role as fathers and mothers. I heard one Holy Family Institute member describe chastity within their lives as, this is my chance to publicly say again to the world that this, my wife or my husband, is the most special person in my heart. That I give my life first to God, but through God, that they become the queen of my life. And that my husband is the king, or I don't not to use that term, but the king of my heart, the king of my heart, not in a ruling kind of way, but the king of my heart and the queen of my heart. It's a really I think there could be probably no greater gift to a spouse than to make that particular offering. So you can look at that. It basically talks about it in legal form, what chastity, what the person is called to in the statutes. The statutes are meant to be descriptions of your life, not like big commentaries. They're not like books on chastity. There's been hundreds of books on chastity. But I'll give you a few pointers that I think you will find important. But that's not where the statutes come in. The statutes come in calling us to that particular life and how we have to obtain this in our lives. But I can say this, the day you got married is the day and the same thing for me, is the day I was ordained, did not mean my desires that I had previous to that went away immediately. But they can be mastered. And when we fail, we must pick up and strive again. It did not take away, it does not mean all of you went suddenly from being unchaste to chaste, as you well know. I think everyone can truthfully attest that that's not necessarily the case. Some will have to work at it a little bit more. The church understands this. She knows that our desires of the flesh do not simply go away after time has passed. Our natural desires for food, drink, sex, comfort, freedom from pain, shelter, and life will continue to persist. The Catechism of the Catholic Church actually says these words: self-mastery is a long and exacting work. One can never consider it acquired once and for all. It presupposes renewed effort at all stages of life. At all stages of life. One of the goals of chastity is actually what I call the spirituality of marriage. I saw this in a book, you know, and it really struck me this years ago. The spirituality of marriage is tenderness. It's allowing oneself to become open to their spouse, it being able to become, in a sense, vulnerable. It's not standing there like a closed wall. We can become walls to each other. And that happens through our own ego and through our sometimes our persistence. But chastity helps us to let go and to love. The end of chastity is love. Love for God, and love particularly to what he has called us. For you, that would be your married life. And for me, that would be my priestly life. If I'm more chaste, I will love my priesthood more. If you are chaste, you will love your marriage more. That's the absolute truth. It's not a scary word. It's only a scary word in our culture because we have made it so, and because there are a lot of people that are not trying to actually work for it. We need to try to actively work toward it. So I want you to know that in the context of the sacrament of matrimony, chastity is still a long and exacting work, and it is a gift. The church says this: in the fullness of truth, human sexuality is a gift from God. The Catechism even says that sexuality is a source of joy and pleasure. That doesn't mean it takes away pleasure, but we just have to, I mean, of course it's pleasurable. Sex is pleasurable. You know, it's liken it to this: eating is pleasurable. But when we do it in disordered ways, it becomes gluttony. If we don't order it well, it can become sinful. Even eating can be what can become, as we know, gluttony in our lives. Sexuality and sex is a gift. It is a gift, and it was meant to be pleasurable. But when it's in disordered, when we treat it in disordered ways, it becomes lust. And the counterfeit to love is lust. So when we enter into that in the Holy Family Institute, we are not saying we are perfect. It is a long and exacting work. But it does say that we are striving for that. And we treat it, you know, and we start to look at how much of a difficulty is this for me? What do I need to work on? How can I really put this in focus for the gift to my spouse and my gift to God? If I'm struggling with particular elements of it, how can I look at it and say, I need work on this, and for the gift of my spouse, and for the gift of my marriage, and for the gift of my life before Christ. I often say pursuing such a thing might just save my soul. Now, this might not be your struggle, your primary struggle. I think everyone has little struggles. When we talk about other aspects, we might talk about them as being your primary struggle, you know, in life, pride or something of that nature. But it's important for us to look at all of the things that are there. So this says this, I think it's also, it sets us up for freedom. Sexuality, I read this quote again, from St. John Paul II said this: sexuality by means of which man and woman give themselves to one another through the acts which are proper and exclusive to spouses is by no means something purely biological, but concerns the innermost being of the human person as such. It is realized in a truly human way only if it is an integral part of the love by which a man and a woman commit themselves totally to one another until death. The total physical self-giving would be a lie if it were not the sign and fruit of a total personal self-giving. Marriage is a total personal self-giving. It says the same words that Jesus says when he offers us the Eucharist. This is my body given up for you. That's what you say to your spouse. This is my blood given up for you. That's the promise Jesus makes. So that's why those are wedding vows right there. When Jesus says that, when the priest says those words at Holy Communion, he's also kind of saying it for himself too. This is my body given up for you, the church. This is my blood given up for you, the church. And the married couple says that to one another. Those are the most profound words, in a sense. I want to read a quote from John from this book that I read, and I read it recently, and I thought it just hit me to. I need to say this to the novices. It says, in 1976, a young cardinal by the name of Karol Wojtyla was visiting the United States, and during his time here, he said this, quote, "We are now standing in the face of the greatest historical confrontation humanity has ever experienced. I do not think the wide circle of the American society or the wide circle of the Christian community realize this fully. We are now facing the final confrontation between the church and the anti-church, between the gospel and the anti-gospel, between Christ and the antichrist. This confrontation lies within the plan of divine providence. It is therefore in God's plan, and it must be a trial which the church must take up and face courageously." 2 years later, that man went on to become Pope John Paul II, now Pope Saint John Paul II. That battle, that book goes on to say, that battle is not without. That battle is within each of us. We might look at it first as a battle from without. Oh, I have to change society. What that book goes on to say after that quote, it says, it begins by changing from within. We have to look within ourselves. And when we do, we will become happier, truly happier, because we are living in Christ. And that's what I want to call you to in novitiate. And that's what it means to be called to chastity, poverty, and obedience. You are being called to the perfection of Jesus Christ. And that's the gift of the Holy Family Institute at its center. I'm going to now ask to give flesh to this as Jim and Louisa McMillan are going to speak. And then at the end, if anybody has any questions, we can then have some questions. So I turn it over to you, Jim and Louisa, if you could share your story and a little bit about your life as Holy Family Institute members.
Hi, everybody. Very nice to meet you. As Father said, we're Jim and Louisa McMillan. We're perpetually professed members of the Holy Family Institute. We live in Colorado, have 3 daughters and 5 grandchildren, 2 of whom were born within the last month. So, well, just a month ago.
No.
Rio was born the 19th.
Yeah, July 26th.
Oh, okay. So 4 or 5 weeks, you know, time is a little compressed right now for us. We were married in Colombia, Louisa's native country, and were called by the Lord to join the Holy Family Institute, or as it's known there, the Instituto Santa Familia, when we began looking for ways to grow spiritually together. very often, especially in Latin America, in many countries and cultures, there will be different things for the men and different things for the women. Well, we were newlyweds. We wanted to do something together. That was part of what attracted us to one another. We got married in 1998. It was Louisa's second marriage. She was widowed. Her husband died, and she had 2 children from that marriage. And I was the godfather to her oldest daughter. So there's a whole telenovela explaining all of that. But I was an exchange student in Colombia in her house back in high school in 1978. And that's when we first met. Actually, she was in the United States for that whole year. So we wrote letters to one another. And she wrote to me in English, I wrote to her in Spanish. So you can imagine there wasn't a lot of communication in those letters. But we met for the last week or two when I was in Colombia. And then we kept in touch, or more likely, our parents kept in touch, our mothers in particular, even though they didn't speak each other's languages. They shared information which, could easily be translated by someone. But over the years, I went and I visited, and Louisa had a baby girl. She was married and had a baby girl recently. Her father was going to be the godfather, but he had a health problem and he couldn't travel to the capital city, Bogota, where the baptism was going to be. I happened to be there. I showed up kind of randomly as a surprise. And he said, why don't you go in my place? And so I went. But when we went to talk to the priest, he was like, no substitutes. You're the godfather. So I became godfather to her oldest daughter in 1985. We got married in 1998. So, as we like to say, I was in marinade for a long time, right? In preparation. But when we look back, and very often, I think in our spiritual journey, things become clear only when we look back and we can see how the Lord acted in different ways. And in our case, the story of how we came together as husband and wife, and then as members of the Holy Family Institute, is really, really amazing. If you saw it, it would be a Hallmark movie, and you would say, oh, that's so contrived. But it really does happen. I had kind of what you might call a life of dissipation, right? Remember the prodigal son. So in college, and I went to live in New York City afterwards. I was living the good life, spending all my money in bars and having fun with my friends, going to Mets games, saw them win the World Series, which was nice, but there was an awful lot of drinking and having other kinds of, less than wholesome activities involved. But then my life felt kind of empty. And I ended up leaving New York and going back to Ohio. And I had a bit of a spiritual conversion during a parish retreat there, when I was staying at my parents' house. And I went to this parish retreat, and there was a line from Ephesians that just hit me like a ton of bricks. The first chapter, 3rd verse. God so loved the world that he sent his only, that God loved me so much that before he created the world, he wanted me, he envisioned me to be holy. And that just blew me away. Before he created the world, God had a plan for me. And I didn't know it at the time, but what were you doing at that time, Louisa?
praying. So so my first husband passed, and I had 2 children. I went back to live with my mom, and I got a job in a town. Is anyone from Colombia here? Okay, so I lived in Buga, near Cali, and I got a job in Cali with Colgate Palmolive. So I had to drive every day from Buga to Cali, about an hour and 15 minutes, So I started saying the rosary, and I knew that I had a vocation for marriage, and I knew that I didn't want to be by myself the rest of my life. So I started praying the rosary when I went to work and in my way back. And I started making a list of what virtues and values I wanted my husband to be. And I asked God, please send me someone, that I don't want to be by myself. I want someone that loves my children, that don't have any addictions or vices, and that he's a houseman, that he believes the same things that I believe. So just to say that when my husband passed, that event brought me to Jesus, because I was, I wasn't a bad person, but I was not thinking about God at that point. So when I encountered Jesus and I started praying and all this, so my daughter, my oldest daughter, who was about 12 years old, she started bugging me, Mom, where's my godfather? I don't know him. I only know pictures of him. He came once and brought me a teddy bear, and I want to see him. I want to, where's him? No way. I was a widow. I was my salary was almost the minimum when I was working, and I couldn't afford a phone call to the United States. But she was 12 years old, and she started, asking me, insisting intensamente. And then finally I said, okay, I'm going to try to find him. And I got him, I found him, I called him where he was.
Track me down.
I did track him down. And then he wrote a note saying, I'm so sorry, I don't even knew that Sarita was born. And I have missed a lot of the time of Gabriela's growing and everything. So what can I do to reivindicate myself? So I read the letter to my daughters, and my daughter said, oh, ask him to come. And so I wrote him an email, and he didn't say anything about that. And then the second email, and he didn't say anything about that. And we had already been, from one email each week, we started writing 2 and 3, and then thinking, something can be kind of blending in here. So one day I said to him, are you scared to come? Are you scared? And he said, wow, why do you ask me that? So finally we planned that he will come. I called him in September of 1997. He went to visit us in December of 1998.
No, 97.
97. And then we got married in July of 1998. And just to finish the story of the praying, in my prayers, I also asked Jesus, I want a sign the day I am with the person you're sending me. Because sometimes I was feeling so alone, and I met someone, and I liked that person, but I said, if this is not the person, just get him away from me. And I asked him, can you give me a sign of seeing green rays of light on a sunset? And then, and every time I went to Bogota to visit, for training or something, and see a friend that was not married, or an ex-boyfriend or something like that, I will come searching in the sunset. And it was just that light green, really light, kind of aguamarina, that color. And I said, that's not the green I want to see. You need to let me see green rays of of light in the sunset. So I kept praying and praying and waiting and waiting. And that was when Jim went to visit us. We went to Salento. We rent a cabin there, and we went with my mom and the girls. And then
My 3 mothers-in-law.
exactly. And then the day we were coming back to my house after the trip, we were in the car. We were Jim, the girls, and I, and then my uncle that had come to visit us. He was with my mom, and then I started seeing such a beautiful sunset, and it was the copper color. You know, that copper that you see when the sunset, when the copper is rusting, and it was orange, and there was this beautiful orange clouds. And suddenly, behind one of those beautiful clouds come green rays of light. But it was green like the leaves of a plant. Yeah, it was really green, but imagine this as a green gray ray of light.
Rays of light.
And I forgot about my sign, and I stopped the car, and everyone comes to watch that sunset. And I said, look at that, it's so beautiful. We took pictures, but the camera never takes the light color. And then, but we took pictures, and I said, oh my God, this is so beautiful. And then suddenly it comes to my mind, my sign, this is my sign. And he gets all like, what sign? What are you talking about? So I told him about my sign. And then now he says that he had to marry me because he couldn't go against God's will.
Yeah. That's what's called setting the hook in fishing, right?
Yeah, but the thing is, and the reason why we're telling you this long story is that we were meant to be together. God had, God was blessing us even from the beginning, from, I don't know, when he brought Jim to be an exchange student in my house with my parents, and I was an exchange student here in the States, and I had another husband, and I can say, well, we had 2 kids, and it was tragic when he died, but I knew that I had this vocation. And when I went back to God and I went back to Jesus, I started thinking, this is so beautiful. And life is so important that we cannot, we have to keep him together. And when we got married, we were so much, not only in love, but we were also like looking for Jesus. And we, like he said, we wanted to find something where we grew together. So I had my prayer group with some girls, and he probably was welcome, but it was not a prayer group that we wanted. So since this had happened, and my daughter at the time we got married was 13. I don't know if you have had a 13-year-old kid in your life. Okay. So the honeymoon was also had the tormenting side with that 13-year-old, fighting and
every silver lining has a cloud, right?
Yeah. So I was looking for a psychologist because I needed someone to help us. And I got this psychologist, and he said, I started first interviewing him because I didn't want my daughter to be with someone that didn't believe in God and that could lead her to something that was not what I wanted for her. So I started talking to him. I told him the story, and we started talking about my girl, that she was feeling kind of betrayed in her dad because he was dead. So we were fighting against a ghost with Jim. So finally he said, you know what, I have an invitation for you. He was a member of the Holy Family Institute there, and he sent me to talk to someone that was working in recruiting members. So we went to talk to this person, and we thought it was beautiful that when they talk about vows, really chastity.
We just got married.
Exactly. What are you talking about? So we had an appointment with Father Vicente Mioto, who is an Italian priest, just like seeing John Paul II. He seems like him, and he was the delegate for the institute in Colombia. So we went to Bogota and we talked to him, and he gave us like 2 or 3 hours. We were talking to him, and he explained to us how the vows were not something to tie us. It was to give us freedom, and that's how I understood marriage at that moment. When I got married to Jim, I felt free. I felt free. I don't know how to I don't know if you have experienced that, but marriage is not a tie like many people think. Marriage is a way that you have a relationship, you support each other, and you're free because as a human being, you're meant to be in relationship, So that was really, really beautiful. And then we started getting into the Holy Family Institute. You want to tell more?
Yeah, the setup of the institute in Colombia was kind of localized because mail service was very unreliable. So everything was done kind of locally. We met in small groups. We got to know quite well the people in the Cali area where we were living. And around that time, or while we were still there, the founder, Blessed James Alberione, was beatified. And at that point in time, there was a real growth in membership and vocations in the Institute. And we helped to introduce people to the Institute. And so that one of the ways we learned the statute and what the vows mean was by helping others to learn it. So as we progress, we're helping those who are a little bit newer than we were along. And that helps us. It reminds us of what our compromises, what our commitments are, what the vows are. And one of the, if there's any like nugget of wisdom to share with you, it would be always go back to the beginning, always go back to the statutes, to the basic things. Ask yourself, how are we doing in terms of what our vows are, in terms of the commitments we should be keeping, in terms of our prayer life? Well, you may have heard the term the Pauline car or cart, right? It was Father Alberione talked about 4 wheels. A car needs 4 wheels properly inflated in order to run well, right? And the Pauline car has 4 wheels. It's piety, our prayer life, right? Study, poverty, and apostolate. So we should examine ourselves in those 4 areas and see how we're doing in terms of what the statutes ask us to do. So during this time of your novitiate, learning about those commitments, the obligations, and going kind of deeper into that is important. But you'll find always come back to it. Maybe not in a circle, but kind of like a spiral staircase going up and up. Each time you come around to the same topic, you're a little higher up, right? Maybe you're a little closer to God. You see it from a different perspective, but you're still looking at the same thing, the same aspect. Yeah. And we have a tendency maybe to overcomplicate things. So for us, every year when we have our spiritual exercises, every month when we reflect, we ask ourselves, how are we doing? And we always find we're coming up a little bit short in something, maybe drifted too far one way or another. And if we're engaged in activities, that are good, religious, spiritual activities, but we're ignoring some of the basics of our Pauline spirituality, then because we have the gift of our vows, we're actually committing a sin. We're committing a failure. We're failing to fulfill our commitments, even though we're doing something good. instead. So we always come back to the beginning, to the statutes. And I hope that by studying them, you'll really learn to love them. And every time you come back, I guarantee you will read something and find something that you didn't notice
Like
before.
when you go to mass and you read the gospel that you keep kind of hear every 3 years, the same gospel, but you hear it and I haven't think about this way, and then you find different ways. But I wanted to say one thing that Father Mioto told us that it was key for me. I kept asking myself as a novice, and in my time of preparation, or in our time of preparation, I kept asking, how is this, what is being a saint? What is, like, what is sanctity? What does it mean for me? I'm not perfect. I'm not good enough. How can I pretend to do vows to be, for sanctification of my life? What is this? I'm a sinner. And Father Mioto said something to me that was key in this process, and it was the most important part of sanctity is that you want to become a saint. That's when it starts. It doesn't matter if the next day you die and you are still the worst person in the world, but you wanted to become saint. You are a saint, right? So it's holy. That's it. That's the word. Yeah. So that is, so is the desire to be holy, is the desire to work in your life to be each time better, but not to be perfect. Probably never you will be perfect. If you read the lives of any saint, Saint Francis of Assisi, he always thought he was the worst person in the world, even when he was perfect. But of course, we are far from that. He was a saint. But your life you can walk through that tower, that holiness, if you want to, if that is the desire of your heart. And sometimes you go back 2 or 3 steps because, I did this, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It is not. So you go back then to the beginning, and then you go back to where you were, and then you keep going. That's life. When you never teach, you are never perfect in anything. You have to practice, you have to fail, you have to fall, you have to do many things, and then it's the practice that makes you perfect or makes you good.
Perfecter.
Yeah. And remember, the excellent is the enemy of the good. So you don't have to be perfect to do the vows. You just need to desire to be perfect. So
what can I add to that?
Jim and Luisa, thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions for Jim and Luisa that you'd like to ask tonight? Learn a little bit more about them and their life in the Institute. Any challenges that you see that you still thought that they might be able to answer? They probably had the same questions or challenges that you might have when they were thinking about the Institute.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of two-pronged. One is as perpetually, declared couple, do you share contact with other couples like you guys? Do you exchange ideas, ways of praying and things like that, or are you kind of isolated in your little cocoon there? And the second one is what do you find? I guess this may be individual to every couple, but it's related to the first question in that sense. That what do you find is the most challenging at the very beginning for a couple to go through? I mean, let's say we're all mature couples here. We're not looking to flirt around or anything like that.
Well, because we're here in Colorado, I think we are the only, well, we're the nearest other HFI member is in New Mexico. So we see her sometimes, but now since the pandemic with Zoom and everything, we've been able to meet much more frequently with other people. And there are what used to be like in-person meetings when we were in Colombia, we can now do virtually. We do try to get to the Triduum in Ohio once a year. We haven't been able to this year. We weren't able to. It just took place this past week, but we could attend over Zoom, so that was a big help. Getting together in person is always best, but we also have, there's the monthly report. We're in communication with Father Matthew, who is the director here in the United States. You all are meeting with Father Michael, so that counts as your kind of monthly meeting. And working together with one another or with other couples who are also in your novitiate group, that can be a very good way of supporting one another. So I would encourage you to stay in contact with one another. The second part of the question was about the challenges that we face. I think having that separation was a big change for us. When we came to the States, everything was done by mail, by regular mail. And we were not used to that at all. We felt very alone, very isolated. There was one blessing from the pandemic. It was being able to meet over Zoom for us. It was a huge help. We also did find local priests. We did try to reach out and recruit other members, but we also got involved for our apostolate, and everybody can do a different type of apostolate in the Institute, right? We're not all supposed to be, writers or radio hosts or podcasters or bloggers. Some people are, and that's wonderful. But whatever you feel called to or involved in, you can make that part of your apostolate by adding a Pauline intention, a Pauline spirituality to what you do. In our case, we got involved with Worldwide Marriage Encounters. So we were working directly with married couples who were seeking to deepen their understanding of God's desire for their wonderful marriage.
And we asked Father Tom at the time if it was something that he will permit us to, because we didn't know if we were like changing,
if we were moving away from what we were expected to do. So that communication always helped, and he gave us his blessing. And we were involved in that. We still are for quite some time. But going to the Triduum, if you can, each September, that's a wonderful thing to do. Getting together in groups in your local area is wonderful as well.
Well, also, we have been close to the parish priest, support the parish priest. And we were for 6 years the coordinators for the evangelization committee in our parish. So just trying to see how we can tell. And that our focus was always like, how do we help people grow in the adoration, in adoration. And then we will bring speakers, or we will try to do talks or whatever about that. So like you can put your part of Pauline spirituality in whatever job you do at the parish. And I think that the obedience, that vow of obedience to the Pope, it's obedience to your parish priest as well. And then work with the parish.
It wasn't necessarily what we thought we wanted. We had big plans, right? But it was through reflection and humility and prayer, we were able to see it. It was what we were being called to do.
Let me add something to that. With a lot of the American members, or members in the United States, I should say, it's such a large country that a lot of members are spread out. We don't have too many pockets, at least at this time. We'd love to develop more that are similar to what Jim and Luis experienced in Colombia. That's something like what we're trying to develop in Boston. There's a little bit of that where I am right now in Fresno. I'm giving this in Fresno. There is a little bit in New Jersey, a little bit like that in Ohio, but a lot of members are spread out and there. And we would love to see it eventually. We have to begin with pockets. And Father Matthew is making efforts he recognizes that not everyone can go to the Triduum. So for instance, he's coming out here to Fresno in October, giving a retreat to the Fresno members next month. And last month, it was short notice for us, but he came to New Jersey. A few families went down with me to New Jersey. These were opportunities to connect with some of the Holy Family Institute members in New Jersey. We even know that's not always possible. So it's important for us to stay connected, if we can, to a pocket like Boston. And then when possible, use Zoom to connect. We're inviting more Zoom meetings where people are getting to know other members of the Holy Family Institute. I'm doing these monthly ones so that you can get to know Jim and Luisa from Colorado. You'll also next month get to know Ava and Zolt are going to give a witness. They're from Arizona. The following month after that, Greg and Kim Burke from Philadelphia. And then we have the month after that, we have Michael and I'm forgetting her name, Divine. Their last name is Divine, Jessica. They're from the Carolinas. I think it's South Carolina, are going to be giving their witness. And so these are great opportunities for us to meet and grow together also as a Holy Family Institute. Any other questions for Jim and Luisa tonight? I know we've gone a little bit over time. I don't want to keep it too much more, but if you had a question, it doesn't hurt to ask. Okay, nobody tonight. I don't see anyone raising their hand. Oh, I see Mauricio. Okay, Mauricio.
Jim, did you see green on that rainbow?
I did. It was
It was not a rainbow.
no, it wasn't a rainbow. It was the sun behind a big cloud, and literally fingers of light. You know, there were orange and green, and the green was the color of oxidized copper roofs that you see. You see a lot of that in New England. You know, it was greener than that. You know, we took so many pictures, but none of them could really fully capture it. It was something I've never seen before, and I had lived in Colombia in that area for a year.
And
so.
people said that was the effect of the burns of sugarcane. And I am from the Cauca Valley, and never, ever in my life I've seen a sunset like that, ever. And I didn't see it again.
So
Not as common.
God is good.
Yes. And I one
All
more
the
thing.
time.
I just wanted to say that I think I speak for Jim too. I better if you have a group to study the statue, and one day you want to call us and say, hey, you want to join us? We would love to join you, because we like also to go back and study the statue. Not to teach you, because it's more like to read and discuss and talk about it. And if you want to invite us, we would love to do it, to be with you in that.
Yeah.
So what I'd like you to do next month, they have just gotten the statutes newly in their hands as beginning this period of novitiate. So I'd like you to, chapter 2, I think you can read through. You've heard me speak about that, the spiritual life, dozens of times. If you wanted to ask me any questions or had any questions, feel free also to ask me, or I could give you Jim and Luisa's email, and you could reach out to them. I'll send it anyway, if you wanted to reach out and ask them any questions, or any of our future speakers. But also chapter 3, tonight we did chastity. So at least I'd like you to read through page 24 through page 29. Okay. If you have any questions, now you might read ahead and look at some of the things, like, for instance, when you get to the chapter on stages of formation, you might read, like in the novitiate, it says there, during the novitiate, the candidate will each day take part in the Eucharistic celebration. It says, if possible, take part. It might say, give time to meditation on the Word of God. Pray especially the Holy Rosary. Set aside time for Eucharistic adoration. The point is, the church and Pauline family knows that not everybody can get to Mass every day. Some of you are able to do that, and it's a great gift in your life. Not everybody can do that. And so not everyone has a church right there that they can get even into for Eucharistic adoration, or maybe your church is not even having Eucharistic adoration. But it does mean to develop a devotion to that, the desire to do that, and when possible, seek to try to do that. The rosary is something we'd like to encourage. If that's not something you're regularly doing, we're going to try to encourage that in you as part of your life. Like as Jim and Louisa said, you might not be perfectly doing everything that's listed there. We don't set the bar low, though. We're trying to set the bar high, because we're seeking holiness of life. We're seeking to be saints. No saint ever achieved sainthood by setting the bar low. We have to try to set the bar high. And prayer is what we're trying to say is prayer is integral to our lives as Pauline members. But you know what? It's integral to every life, every Christian's life, even those who don't know it. So we're just trying to set the bar high. So you might read some things, you might have some questions. A lot of it needs to be fleshed out, okay? And you might get confused by something that's said. Don't panic, all right? We're talking about next week, we're going to focus on poverty, okay? We're going to talk about here in poverty. And then in November, we're going to talk about obedience. And then in December, we're going to do a little bit more. And then we're going to be challenging some of you to consider making profession of vows, in the Institute. Some of you have already mentioned to me you feel somewhat ready to make profession of vows, and for 1 year. It's not, when you make your first profession of vows, you don't make it for a lifetime. The discernment continues. You make it for 1 year, and then you renew your vows for 5 years, actually, before you would make it perpetually for life. So there's a lot of opportunity to grow and understand these statutes. And as Jim and Louisa said, you're always going back, renewed in it, Some people fall off a little bit, but they need to be renewed, and then just take a good look at it. So it's not meant to scare you away in any way. It's meant to set up a life of freedom, of living holiness for you. So we've gone way over tonight. I don't want to carry it on because it's late. And but I want to thank you, Jim and Louisa, for your time tonight, giving your time to the beginners last week, giving your time tonight. And this is a great gift to us. And we know that we're going to be reaching out to you and developing this more. I'm going to send a copy of this. We're recording it to Father Matthew and to those. A few perpetual members have asked here in Fresno if they could also see it. So we'll do that too with Father Matthew's permission. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about contact with Father Matthew in the coming days. Saturday night, we have our gathering, we meet twice a month, actually, and we'll be meeting again this Saturday night for our family nights together. Okay. So God bless you. Let's pray a prayer in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Almost everybody here, Jim and Luisa, speak Spanish, so we'll do a Hail Mary in Spanish. Dios te salve María.
María, llena eres de gracia.
El Señor es
Señor es contigo.
bendita
Bendita tú eres entre todas las mujeres.
y bendito
Y
es el
bendito es
vientre Jesús. Santa María, Madre de Dios, ruega por nosotros los pecadores, ahora y en la hora de nuestra muerte. Amén. En el nombre del Padre, del Hijo, del Espíritu Santo. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
And
you,
God
Father
bless.
Mike.
Thanks, everybody. God bless you.
Muchas
Thank you,
gracias.
Jim and Luisa.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Gracias,
much.
Luisa, Jim.
Muchas gracias.
Bien, nos vemos.
Adiós.
Adios.
Gracias, buenas noches.